This idea of life being on the side of the mountain, not the top. It's not just about getting to the summit or finishing the climb. It's not just about having an exit or have a certain level of money or success. It is about the journey that goes there and having the focus that, okay, I'm trying to go to the top, but I'm also here.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Aiken and I manage career services at the Department of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford University. Welcome to MS&E Stories and Voices, Graduating Student Profiles. Life is a journey, a cliche for a reason. But what happens when 6 months of your life is completing a 7,500 mile long cycling journey? Graduating master's student Mark Khalil discovered the answer to that question last year when he took a leave of absence and biked down the entire length of South America. It was fascinating to follow along with his blog at the time, and having reread it in anticipation of this conversation today, I'm so excited to dive deeper into his exploration, epiphanies, and discuss the lessons he learned and questions he both asked and answered. So Mark, welcome, and thank you again for being here today. I want to start by going over your background, actually, because I feel like you are seriously one of the most multicultural people I know in terms of where you've studied, where you've lived, the languages that you speak before we even get to the cycling trip. So can you just give us that intro to yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I was born and raised in Cairo, in Egypt. I did my undergrad at the University of Toronto in financial economics, graduated 2019, studied abroad there in Japan, Hong Kong, Australia. Always loved traveling, exploring the world. I didn't feel like I was done with my education, so I attended Yale for a master's in development economics, 2019 to 2020, the COVID year. And I had been thinking about doing a PhD, but after Yale, I got a job with the Overseas Development Institute, which was like a Peace Corps type of job, but it was more focused on economic strategy and building technical capacity for governments in developing countries. So I went to Sudan for a year from 2020 to 2021 before the war, which was a very formative year for me there.
Yes, you truly have lived and worked and studied all over the place. So how did studying and working during that turbulence in Sudan impact you?
I think I was ready to move home after my 1 year in Sudan. It had been already 6 years since I'd been in Egypt. And so I was looking for opportunities to come back. I knew I was interested in sustainability. There was some interest in MS&E from different research I had done on complex systems, on economic networks, things that are MS&E adjacent. I'd done a couple of internships in financing for solar plants, renewables, economic strategy consulting. So I knew there was something for me at the intersection of the economics of energy systems. So after Sudan, I went back to Cairo to figure out what would that look like. I lived with my grandma for a while, which was wonderful.
That's so sweet.
And yeah, I decided to explore pursuing a PhD at the intersection of the economics of energy systems and energy networks. And while I was working on my applications, was introduced to an early stage venture firm by a friend. And then within a few days, everything changed. So I was accepted here for the master's to MIT, and I was offered a job with this venture firm.
That is a lot all at once.
Yeah, and so it was quite an overwhelming time. I remember actually giving my mom my phone and going hiking in the Sinai for 3-4 days and thinking when I emerge back, I'm going to have a decision about what I'm going to do.
Was it like that? Is that what happened?
Yeah. So I came back, I went with my sister and another friend, and I decided I wanted to come to Stanford. Part of the reason was I wanted to start putting roots down somewhere that I can see myself staying long term. And I liked the idea of staying in California. And so I decided to defer for a year, continue being in Egypt, get a little more work experience, save some money, be with family, and then started the MS&E program here the fall of 2023.
I'm trying to figure out if it's inevitable, given all of this love of world travel that you have and this desire for all the exploration and fun projects that you do, or ironic, given what you just said about wanting to settle down somewhere, that fairly shortly after you got here, you came in and you're like, so how would I do the cycling trip? And it's going to be down the whole west coast of South America. So I'm going to need 6 months. So I'll need a leave of absence for that. How did that decision come about, given this desire to settle, but then also clearly this wanderlust continuing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't think that there's a bit of a paradox there from wanting to settle down, but also want to be free and cycle and hike around the world. I'd been thinking about South America for some time. I'd always been very curious about the continent and wanted to learn Spanish and wanted to go explore that part of the world. While I was living in Sudan, I met a few cyclists that were doing the route from Cairo to Cape Town. And that really sparked the idea of exploring by bicycle and doing more long distance cycling. So in 2022, I paid a deposit to join this group that were doing the South America trip. I was really reflecting a lot and praying and thinking, all right, this is the right decision, talking to different mentors I had, and ultimately decided if I didn't get into the PhD program or get a job that I'm super excited about, then I'd do it. So I'd been saving, I'd been learning Spanish. So I knew it was possible. Then January 2024, I got a decline from the PhD I had applied to and thought, okay, I wanted to do a PhD so I had more freedom and autonomy, could explore things on my own terms. And I realized a lot of those motivations were there for the trip also. It was an alternate way for me to scratch that same itch of wanting to do things my own way and chart my own course. So I doubled the planned units that I was taking, doubled up my Spanish classes, went to see you guys to see what I had to do to file for my leave of absence for the fall.
At that point, then there's no turning back to the magnitude of a decision. So when did you get started and what's all the stats and logistics? Because it's pretty mind-blowing, the mileage and the dedication it takes for something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So June 30th, 2024 was our first cycling day from Cartagena in Colombia in the north on the Caribbean coast. And the total was about 12,000 kilometers. So we'd do maybe 120 kilometers per day, about 5 days a week. Started in Colombia, then Ecuador, then Peru, then Bolivia, then Argentina, then Chile. And then we crisscrossed at the end, Argentina and Chile a couple of times. Finished in December. Yeah, you're part of an organized group. A lot of them are retired. And so it created this actually wonderful opportunity for intergenerational friendships. That was this kind of a really nice surprise from the trip as well. Didn't expect to make friends with people in their 70s. That was very fortuitous.
Yeah, my mom was a geriatric nurse, and so I grew up with a lot, and there's so much value in those intergenerational friendships and the different perspectives you get from that, just the richness of experience that everybody can bring. I remember when you first came in and we're talking about doing this, and it made my mind explode with excitement for you, but that mileage, that 12,000 kilometers, for those of us who work in miles, that's 7,500 miles, about 75 miles each day, which sounds completely exhausting. So talk us through a little more about how it all works.
Yeah, absolutely. To preface, before this trip, I had been training. I had been cycling and swimming and trying to cross train and get physically ready. But the most I'd ever cycled in a day wasn't more than 100 kilometers. And so I knew for sure that I'm going to get fit doing this as well, because there's no level of preparation I can do that will ever feel like it was enough. And the first month was exceptionally hard. It was tough physically, mentally, emotionally. Colombia was by far the hilliest country, and it was also the hottest. And just getting off the bike after being in the saddle for 8-9 hours during the day, the last thing you want to do sometimes is set up a tent, find somewhere to take a cold shower, because hot water is not really that common. But yeah, over time, I think you get stronger. And I learned a little bit more about how to take more stops and to not ride alone, because sometimes riding with someone else makes the time go a bit faster. And we had the support team in case we ever needed it, so we could take advantage of that for doing partial days. And once we got further south in Patagonia, the experience became more of a priority than completion. I think of my relationship with reading as an analogy. Like every book that I started, I used to have to finish it. And I think my relationship with books evolved about, I don't need to finish every single book that I start. In the same way, I don't need to ride every single inch. I'm going to do how much as I can. But I'd much rather stop and talk to locals and take it all in and go on little side quests than stay on the route and make sure I ride every single day, every single inch.
Yeah, basically. There are too many booths in the world to keep going with something that you're not enjoying. And so there's too many places to explore. And I love this idea that you had of popping off on little side routes and taking the time to talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the side quests that add a lot more flavor and more spontaneity.
As often as you could, you were posting these blog posts about where you were at and what you were doing and what you were learning and the wisdom of others that you were hearing from. One of the things that was really fun in that was some of these connections, sometimes subtle, sometimes a little bit more explicit, on how what you were learning connected back to MS&E. So one of the explicit ones was like the stochastic modeling concept of that burn-in period that got started. You mentioned that first month was really particularly difficult. So can you elaborate on those connections that you were making between your MS&E learning and what you were experiencing? And then if there's been anything since you've got back too, where you've been able to use what you learned on the ride to inform how you've been approaching your studies since you returned.
So yeah, this idea of a burn-in period is something I picked up in one of my MS&E classes on stochastic simulations. And the idea is that when you start modeling some type of stochastic system, there's so much volatility in the beginning before it converges on a steady state. And I think that really, I was able to draw the analogy physically, feeling super hot and super cold, and then climbing, then descending, and not sleeping enough, sleeping too much, being dehydrated, being too hydrated, and just all these sorts of oscillations physically that were happening from the shock that was happening to my body. So I think the first 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even the first month, were that burn-in period before my body got used to it. And being aware that it does take that certain time in the beginning. And I think what I noticed as well is whenever we stopped for 3 or 4 days, it was a lot harder to get back into it. So that was an important learning. And there were also a ton of learnings in terms of people dynamics, organizational behavior that draw on different classes here. Almost every single class I've taken has had a certain group project or a group component to it. And I think most of work in the real world is in groups and is in teams. We're a traveling convoy. 17 cyclists did the whole continent. Maybe another 20-25 were in and out at different segments, plus all the locals and all the other people that we interact with and we meet. And so a huge part of it was getting familiar with different characters that are, part of the group. And there was one particularly difficult person who left halfway through, and noticing how his departure changed the group dynamic. In a way, it just made me more aware of, what is the energy that I bring to the group? How can I be a better team member and group member? And made me think and reflect more about that.
That all just sounds pretty life-changing in a lot of ways too. And when you do something like that, I think it's inevitable that there's going to be these existential sort of aha realizations. What would you say, in a nutshell, a few sort of particular lessons or a few different questions and answers that you came to?
Yeah, I'm still asking myself that almost a year later.
Probably the whole rest of your life.
Probably. I think, some of my uppercase takeaways, understanding what's important, what's not. Things like legacy, being in good health, having really strong relationships. Having a mission or a purpose was important too. Every day we knew where we were trying to go, how much we were supposed to cycle. So there was like very clear definition of what success or what completion looks like. And I think that's important as well, to define that in terms of success outside of cycling and outside of travel, what that looks like. Of course, being able to learn from others, being open to interactions with strangers. The kindness of strangers was one of the most incredible things that I experienced on that trip. And being open to spontaneity as well. I think those are things that made the trip so much more beautiful and meaningful. And I want to create more space for that in my life too. And more space for intergenerational friendships, more space for traveling slower. I think we're traveling so quickly all the time, flying everywhere, but there is a charm to traveling slower and being outside and being able to interact, not just with people, but with the natural world. And all of those things, I think, were some of my key takeaways, realizations. And I hope I can cultivate that in my life.
I went back yesterday and reread all of the blog just in anticipation of doing this today, and pulled out a few of my favorite lessons. And you touched on a lot of them there. That I love the way that you phrased it. Life is on the side of the mountains, not at the top. I think that really speaks to this whole thing of the slowing down and taking the time to appreciate the things that we would often, I think, speed past. And then as well, you talked about the importance of reconnecting with your body and your heart relying on intellect and intuition at the same time, and learning to want what you already have, which was already so much, rather than wanting more.
Those are definitely some huge themes. This idea of life being on the side of the mountain, not the top, I think has been hard for me to reflect that. It's not just about getting to the summit or finishing the climb. It's not just about having an exit or have a certain level of money or success. It is about the journey that goes there. And it's having the focus that, okay, I'm trying to go to the top, but I'm also here and I'm also present. And this is what I'm in the struggle. I think relying on intellect and intuition as well has been a very difficult lesson for me. But there's a certain level of intuition that I wanted to cultivate in myself when I'm not speaking perfect Spanish and I still need to communicate with people. I need to be better, reading their body language, which means I need to be better connected with my own and know what I'm trying to communicate. And also experiencing things, not just intellectually, but emotionally and physically. Learning to want more what we already have, and this idea of the American consumerist culture. This was like just such a stark contrast of being in such desolate places in Bolivia or northern Argentina where there's nothing, and realizing you meet people there and they're so happy and they're so generous. And we were sleeping in tents for 6 months and living out of a suitcase, had very little. Every day I'm just wearing the same couple of cycling shirts, but I was very happy. And I think this idea that you need to buy more things to be happy is just not true. That was one of the biggest lessons. Okay, how can I actually get rid of a lot of my stuff and have less and cycle more?
It always comes down to the people. And we hear that so much. And I feel like all of the episodes of this podcast, it ends up being this recurring theme that MS&E is about the people and life is about the people. This element of the kindness of strangers that you talked about, people driving super slow so that you could drive behind them and shelter in a rainstorm, and people gifting you fruits and water and things like that to help you out with what you were doing. It's always so reassuring and faith in humanity to hear those sorts of stories. I love those sorts of things. And it's just that reminder for ourselves of what can we do to help others and their experience and reach their dreams and their ambitions.
Exactly. I think once you're met with so much kindness and generosity by strangers who don't expect anything, the amount of times where I thought, okay, maybe I should pay this fruit salesman on the side of the road that's giving me free bananas, or being invited into someone's home for a coffee somewhere in the Colombian countryside. It was almost insulting when I asked if I could pay them something, right? It's not like this is just welcome to Colombia or welcome to Bolivia or Peru or wherever it was that I was met by so much warmth. And you're right. I think the right response is, how can I do that to others? Not how I can pay them, but how can I pay it forward?
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it. Thinking of paying it forward and moving into the future, and some of the epiphanies and questions that you're asking yourself while you're on this trip are about, what am I going to do next with my life? And how am I going to have that fulfilling career where I can improve the world, improve things for people in a way that's very meaningful and enjoyable. But at the same time, I love this concept that you had of your career still unfolding, the same as this physical journey that you were on. It's kind of every day is a new day. So what are the immediate plans for after graduation then to start building that meaningful career for yourself?
Yeah, great question. Immediately after grad, I'm planning to cycle.
Of course you are.
From here to Santa Barbara. So that'll be a shorter trip, but I'm eager to get back on the bike and unplug a bit. Yeah, I'm really focused on spending time with people I care about before everyone goes on their own journeys, and finding the best opportunity for me that, be a combination of things I care about in terms of sustainability and entrepreneurship. And ideally something that combines the autonomy and freedom and the ability to chart my own course and explore that I want to do and that I want to keep having that. So
taking some time to figure out exactly where and what that's going to look like. Yeah,
exactly. I think it's going to be at the intersection of entrepreneurship and sustainability, but not so clear what that will look like. Yeah.
Maybe that trip down to Santa Barbara, you'll have that aha moment and something will come to you.
Maybe.
hopefully at this point, we've said enough about the blog that people are going to be like, where can I read this for myself now? So what is the URL or the best search engine prompt for people to find it?
Sure. It's nothingbutmotion.com, and it's a Substack. I might keep writing there as I go on more journeys, but the journey is documented there.
I feel like I could just talk to you all day about all of these different concepts and lessons and wisdom that you have. But we do unfortunately have to start wrapping it up. I want to leave some time for the final 3 questions that I always ask everyone. With all of this wisdom that you've gained through this journey, what would you say to people who are just starting theirs in the program? What's your advice for them?
I think one piece of advice which I would give is I think I really took advantage of the opportunity to defer and the opportunity to take a leave of absence. And I think Stanford is so good about that. And MS&E is super accommodating for students that want to do that. The program is flexible enough that you can do that and still graduate on time. Yes, I needed to do more units 1 quarter, but I would encourage people to look into that because it's an opportunity to do something different. And whether that's cycling or whether that's volunteering somewhere, whether that's working on a company, whether that's doing something you wouldn't otherwise do if you're just locked in and going to follow a very linear timeline to finish the program. So I would encourage people to explore the option of taking a leave of absence and doing something interesting.
Yeah. Or switch into part-time too, because we do, like you say, have that flexibility of up to 8 quarters of leave, or that's switching between the full-time and part-time just to mix things up there. Yeah, that's great advice. And then obviously you had so many lessons learned during this trip, but if you were going to boil things down to your one single life maxim and that signature phrase.
I have 2. I have one from my father and one from my mother. From my father, it's balance leads to progress. And I think that's been very meaningful for me. And from my mother, in Arabic, it's اضحك للدنيا والدنيا تضحك لك, which means smile to the world and the world will smile back. And I think it's this idea of putting a lot of good out into the world and approaching others with kindness and generosity and seeing that in other people and seeing that in the world and having that point of view and that perspective.
I love that. In our family, we call it when you're doing the right thing, good things will happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally, we talked earlier about reading and not finishing books and giving yourself the space to not finish books. But what are the 2 books that absolutely you did finish and maybe went back to? One of them MS&E related and the other one just for fun. And then also your favorite other media.
Yeah, sure. The MS&E book I would recommend is called Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. And it's a fantastic introduction to this world of system dynamics and systems modeling. And I think MS&E does a lot of things that are very related to systems and networks. And I thought it was super, super well written, very engaging book. The other book that's just for fun is called The Prophet by Khalil. It's a collection of poetry. And I keep going back to it time and time again. A podcast that I like a lot is called The Knowledge Project by Shane Parrish. It brings in some very interesting speakers, and every once in a while, there's one that the conversation really resonates with me.
It sounds really fun. Mark, thank you again so much for being with us today. Very much hope you keep in touch after graduation here, and I'll be watching out to see what happens next for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of MS&E Stories and Voices, Graduating Student Profiles. This episode was produced and edited by me, Lindsay Aiken, with editing support and post-production from Jim Fabry. Our music was composed and performed by Catherine Barron, MS&E Masters Class of 2023. Please be sure to subscribe to us on Spotify or whichever platform you're listening on, and check out our website at msne.stanford.edu. That's msande.stanford.edu. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.